day, y'all.
And joining us now, Senator Daniel Sparks. He represents Mississippi's District 5, which includes Itawamba, Prentiss, and Tishomingo counties. Serves as the vice chairman of the Senate Corrections Committee. Good to see you there, Senator.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me, Gerard.
All right, so we've got, let's talk first about these Jackson bills.
Sure.
We had one that didn't survive and one that did thus far. Tell us about it.
The biggest thing, of course, the water, what everybody refers to kind of as the bill dealing with the water system, came over from the Senate side, and David Parker was the chair of workforce, worked on that bill. And that bill did, in fact, die yesterday in the House, I believe. But we'll continue to look at that. But one of the things that Senator Parker did is he, when the bill came out, he had a lot of blowback, and he invited everyone to speak with him. He spoke with all the mayors that are involved. He spoke with the appointed administrator on several occasions. And as I understand it, they're expecting someone to take possession of this system once the administrator leaves. And I do have a problem with handing it back to the folks that seem not to be able to run it efficiently. And I would say there's no one in Jackson that says the water system has performed adequately. So we'll continue to work on that, but we need to be in a position to make sure that we're taking care of the capital city as it relates to having drinkable water, as well as water to operate other facilities.
And there's some statutory responsibility as it relates to that. So when the governor stepped in with the Department of Health last year.
And I think it was pretty evident quickly that there were things that could have been done and should have been done that MEMA and the governor's actions quickly improved the situation. And then the people who are even working there seem to be very appreciative of the help. But I think we're going to get there. But, there's a lot of pushback just because people like local rule. I believe in local rule. I would push for that. But if I couldn't drink the water in Belmont, Mississippi, where I'm from, for years, and I couldn't give it to children in formula, and I couldn't flush my toilets, I believe I'd be looking for somebody else to help me
out. Indeed. And then I also saw a local report where the city of Jackson is just providing financial assistance to some of the water customers, literally to pay their water bills. They're using ARPA funds for that purpose.
And it's problematic because one of the other things that's happening is it doesn't appear that they've been billing properly the total group of people on the water system, which would help pay for repairs and things of that nature. And, of course, when you get into municipal government, you have gift provisions and things that you cannot do. You cannot forgive debt. But we have people in Jackson that haven't received a water bill for months and are scared to death they're going to get a $3,000, $4,000 water bill. And I loved how somebody told me, said, we put a provision in there to work out a payment plan. That's not fixing the problem. You should get a bill, and you should know what that bill is, and it should be based on your usage.
All right, so let's talk about the big one, the CCID, the Capital Complex Improvement District expansion bill that Representative Lamar introduced over in the House.
Yeah, there's been a couple of different moving parts because I think at one point they really focused on expanding the borders of the CCID, which would expand everything that is related to it, and that bill has languished. Then 401 also kind of dealt with that, but when it came over to the Senate, it was more geared toward the court, seemed to be more of the discussion. Senator Wiggins on the Judd A side dealt with that bill, and I thought they brought a good product out that made the judges that we have been assigning in Hinds County to deal with backlogs. I found out maybe even today, even longer than the ARPA situation, that there's been a backlog for a while. And the problem was a permanent judge that was appointed. And I'll have to admit, I don't agree with a permanent appointed judge. I don't think that's proper. I think we should elect them. If we're going to elect them across the state everywhere else, we should elect them here. But there seems to be blowback of just dealing with the appointed judges that are dealing with ARPA money. And we're told COVID caused all this. So we're using these funds that have a limited use to try to address that. And then there was an article that came out a couple days ago that I really have taken offense to. You can be on either side of this argument on 1020. But the attempt is to help Jackson, to help deal with crime in Jackson, and to help deal with the backlog. The problem is this article then tried to go to the Mississippi electronic court system and look at other districts that have cases. Well, they happen to pick on my district, the 1st Judicial District, which encompasses 7 counties, and they claim we had 8,000 open cases. Well, there's no way we have 8,000 open cases. And they implied in the article that these were criminal cases. They kept referring to criminal cases. And now everybody wants to blame MEC, which I don't know is the best place for blame. Then they wanted to blame, Cliff Johnson for giving these numbers out. They've been misrepresented, and it defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do, because it was trying to push the narrative that we have other places that have a lot of cases that are backlogged. But, that's not the case. Actually, I talked with my DA, and there's about 2,100 criminal cases that were open. Now, you got to remember, that's 7 counties where I'm from, not one county.
Right.
I have 4 judges for 7 counties, which means you can't have court in 7 counties at the same time. In Hinds County, there's 1 courthouse, as I understand it, and those 4 judges have 1 docket, 1 location.
Yeah.
So that's not a fair comparison. But they settled about 550 of those criminal cases, so they got about 1,600 active, and then there's about 1,300 that are people that have not come to court. They're kind of absconded out there. Then some of the other numbers are skewed, and I'm going to ask MEC. I'm going to send a formal request to the Administrative Office of Courts and MEC to send me the breakdown for my 1st judicial district that I work in, as well as Hinds County. So we need to work on a true narrative, but the intent of the bill is to be helpful. And as I said from the floor the other day, the real issue we might ought to focus on is the number of public defenders, because you've got to get to the people who are accused and get them advised properly, see where we are. Is it a crime lab issue? Is it just an issue that someone has not said, here are your options? Because you take up a lot less time if you can reach an agreement and have a plea than if you go to a trial. But for people who want a trial, we want them to have a speedy trial in accordance with the law.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of sad to me that it's sort of deteriorated to that point where it's become such a political firestorm.
People find something to suit their narrative.
Yeah, and rather than trying to solve this problem. It seemed like we ought to start with acknowledgement we got a problem. And that we don't get that, it doesn't appear out of the mayor. And maybe that's why we have such a big problem. He doesn't believe we have one.
Well, I'll have to admit, I probably don't take criticism as well as I should. I could work on that in my own personal life. But
sure.
If I'm utterly failing, it's not the teacher's fault in school. My parents didn't raise me for that. If I'm failing at work, it's not the employer's fault.
Yeah.
And if I'm failing at the job I'm elected to, it's not the people I represent's fault. It's not somebody else's fault. So we are offering help. I don't think there is any dispute that there is a crime problem in the city of Jackson, that there has been a court case backlog, and that the water has been disastrous for a major metropolitan area, and we're trying to help.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, what about your committee, this corrections committee? What you had going on there?
A lot this year. Chairman Barnett and I, for the last 3 years, got to work on a lot of legislation, particularly parole bills and work bills that were related to inmates and training and trying to reduce recidivism. This year has been more of a monitoring situation to see where we are on some of these programs. We had a report back from the Criminal Justice Task Force, and they wanted to expand some of the things that we've been doing, particularly Chairman Barnett worked with Sheriff Bailey in Rankin County to do a kind of a work program with them, and then they've done that even with MDOC. There's one amazing story where a guy went to work for a local dealership as a tech, and by the time he was parole eligible, he had over $30,000 in the bank, had paid all his fines.
Wow.
This is not, hey, we're going to work somebody for less than minimum wage or minimum wage. We're trying to help people find careers, and I'm excited to track this person to see that he has shown that we can be successful doing that. But I'm also kind of a hawk when it comes to contracts on that side, and you've dealt with this in your career in business.
Oh, yeah.
I get frustrated, and I kind of let that come out this week on the floor. I think I made the comment, you could pick any 5 guys at a sale barn, and they could negotiate better than the government. And I stand behind that. We have a contract review board that looks at the legalities of the contract.
Right.
But who is looking at it for, did we just get out traded?
Yeah, the substance.
That's
of it.
right.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of been pushy on that because, I'm not a chairman because I came in as a freshman, and I'm not ready to be a chairman as a freshman. I'm trying to figure out how the world works.
Sure.
But I have taken this opportunity to work with my chairman and to dig and to read contracts and do those things. I kind of wish all 174 legislators would adopt a piece of government, kind of like adopt a highway, keep it clean.
Yeah.
But let's adopt an agency, a board, a commission, a department, and let's just get all up in there and try to be helpful, but also to make sure they know we're looking after the people's tax dollars.
Not a bad idea, honestly. Are you pleased with Commissioner King? Seems to be doing a good job.
I am pleased that the narrative has changed. I'm pleased of what he has done to address what were the hottest fires, and I want to help them going forward. I promise you, I want to help them, but I don't want to be fleeced. We have to negotiate for the taxpayers of the state of Mississippi. The private businesses are going to negotiate for themselves.
Sure. We've got Senator Daniel Sparks in the Element Well studios. We're coming right back. Stay with us. Little fodder there before we get back to our discussion with Senator Sparks. The city of Berlin is going to allow everyone to go topless in swimming pools, public swimming pools.
Yeah, I just checked. There aren't any flights direct from Jackson to Berlin this weekend.
Oh, my gosh. There's more craziness. Senator Daniel Sparks, our guest in the Element Well studios. All right, let's talk, before we talk about vehicles, let's talk about the ballot measure process.
Sure.
Tell me about that. The Senate wanted a high signature threshold. The House comes out with a version that requires a lower threshold, just different approaches to the number of signatures. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you and I talked about this a couple of years ago when it first came up, and I said I'm more in support of a statutory version, and I think you feel the same way. Because constitutionally we get into a lot of quandary, and maybe there should be a constitutional measure that has different parameters. For instance, if somebody wants to impose term limits, that'd be a fine constitutional matter to put out there.
Totally agree. Which would require amending the Constitution.
That's right. But not engrafting, statutory law in the Constitution.
Agree.
The threshold argument, the biggest concern I have is that I believe under a couple of real recent and famous initiative processes, I think that we saw technology take its place and the ability to gather signatures is different, and maybe the out-of-state interests that come in, the money that comes in. So I do have a little bit of concern. I mean, people have worked really hard to push this state in a conservative direction, Republican leadership, et cetera. So you have all statewide offices that are Republican, and you have supermajorities on both ends, and then you turn around and you allow outside forces to amend something that's against the wishes of what the majority that the people elected. You really get a conundrum there, if you will. But I support the process of getting something out there for a statutory initiative and ballot process. But from a signature standpoint, I'm open for discussion on that.
Okay, so you're not just hardline against the House's version, which is consistent with the present model that's been invalidated by the Supreme Court, that requires 12% of those who cast ballots in the last election, as opposed to the Senate version, which would require 12% of the registered voters. And the numbers show that the difference is about 2.5.
Yeah, it's a big
between
difference.
the Senate and the House.
And it depends on which election you choose. Do you choose the presidential election or the governor's race? And that's why I'm willing to listen to all that. I'd like to have a process, but I do want to make sure that we take into consideration consequences.
Okay. Well, I would just offer this thought, and I said this a couple of days here on the show, that I believe that a higher signature threshold pretty much guarantees the only people that would get a measure on the ballot would be well-funded out-of-state interest. It would lock out to a great extent sort of any measure that was born at the grassroots level.
And I think that's fair. I think that's a very fair analysis. The other thing that I probably would be more interested in thresholds is language of the short title and language of the actual initiative. I do feel like the last one that came through, had it not failed on the congressional district model, I think the Chief Justice signaled that there was further discussion that could be had to go pull the petitions, because each time you're asked to sign that petition, you're supposed to be presented with a copy of it. And it just so happened the last one was 5 pages long, and I would be pretty confident not everybody was provided. Not only did they not read the 5 pages, that they were not even provided the 5 pages. So I'd like for us to make sure our short title's not misleading. And if we have to print the entire thing on the ballot, let's do it.
I could go along with that, because I do think some games can get played with that, as you well know, and this sort of protects against that. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's reasonable. I'm not so sure I'm aligned with the speaker on restricting what could be placed on the ballot. I get his wish to, for example, protect the progress that we've made on banning abortion in the state. I understand that, but I just wonder if that's a slippery slope. What's next? That you can't have any say on that. It's a concern.
Yeah, I'm very pro-life, but it would be hard for me to think a true people's ballot initiative would be, we'll tell you what categories you can have.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right, let's talk about our favorite legislation, HB 401.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just want you to tell us what you supported the legislation. So you and I have talked about this. No secret. You and I have talked about this in a very productive manner, I feel, offline. So tell us what you think about that.
Oh, I appreciate it. And this was a bill that came out last year, and it came as a result of a motor vehicle manufacturer that happened to be electric, is the only models they make. Went to the Motor Vehicle Commission in the state of Mississippi and applied for 2 licenses, one for a dealer and one for a manufacturer. Mm-hmm. And that's not actually available to them, as the commission would believe, and certainly as the law has been interpreted. So they asked for an attorney general's opinion. At the same time, this company went and formed an LLC, and they applied for the license under that state LLC. Okay. Long story short, they ended up with a location. The AG came back and said, we don't see anything in the law that prohibits it.
I read the opinion.
We've, since 1970, basically the current franchise laws are on the books. And so the position was, look, everybody needs to play with the same set of rules. And, last year it kind of popped up. And it was debated pretty heavily, passed on both sides, and then died in conference. So we came back this year with basically the same language that is just saying if you want to have a brick-and-mortar store front, which we call dealerships in the state of Mississippi, that you have to enter a franchise agreement that, the traditional manufacturers cannot do that. It's not that they chose not to. It's actually, I don't think that they're available to do that. And one of the biggest things I want to do, and I think you've agreed with me, we want to get the clear information out there. This does not restrict direct sales. Now, I consider direct sales to be online sales. Mm-hmm. So it does not take that away that you could do. I don't see anything in the language. I have asked people who are on the other side of this bill of me to show me where in the language it does, and no one has shown me that, so I don't believe that. Second, it does not require anyone to build a brick-and-mortar dealership. I think the world of Commissioner Cheney, but he was on yesterday morning, and his statement was they're going to be forced to sell in brick-and-mortar dealerships. No, they're not. They can sell online. I think you've captured it more properly, is there is a route to market that electric vehicle companies prefer, that they're being told, no, you can't do that. I think that's a fair representation.
It is, and I've said that, and I've read the legislation. I read it different than you. And I'm not a lawyer, I freely admit that, but I can read bills and tell what they say. I guess my question would be to you, Senator, is if what you're saying is correct, then if a manufacturer of a motor vehicle, and by the way, it doesn't expressly apply to just electric vehicles, correct? When I read the legislation, I didn't see anything that I guess carved out electric vehicles. It applies to all vehicles.
That's right. We're not picking on electric vehicles.
I just want to make that clear, because it kind of gets referred to as the electric vehicle bill, the Tesla bill. It's really not. It's all new vehicles. Now, we could probably debate without a clear winner of, is that where the auto industry is going? Is it transitioning totally to electric vehicles? I believe they are. I believe the federal government is pushing that a little too fast. We're not quite ready for that. But the question is, so if a manufacturer, let's say Apple is made it known they intend to enter the vehicle business. They're going to start building cars, selling cars. And if Apple says, we only want to sell directly through the app on our iPhone, and to do so in Mississippi, to sell a new vehicle in the state of Mississippi, one must have a license to do that, right? A vehicle license that's granted by the Motor Vehicle Commission. Is that correct?
That's the way the language reads, and I think I know where you're headed, but I'm going to let you go ahead.
Yeah, so if Apple sends their application to the Motor Vehicle Commission to sell their vehicles directly to consumers in the state of Mississippi, without that transaction occurring through a traditional physical dealer in the state of Mississippi, assuming they meet all the other requirements, will the Motor Vehicle Commission grant them a license?
I don't think they need a license. But
I don't either. Yeah, and can we get rid of that?
Well, no, that's the way Tesla's been operating. Okay. Because they've been selling cars, and when this question came up last year, and I did call the Motor Vehicle Commission, and I said, look, as I understand this, the transaction, although it's on an app, that transaction is taking place where the automobile is manufactured. Like you're not buying it; it's being delivered into Mississippi. So I don't believe there's a need for them to have a license to sell online, because that's what Tesla had been doing over the years. And I also, some people get confused. They're like, "You're driving the tax revenue out of here." Well, I live on the Alabama-Tennessee border with my district. If I drove into Tennessee or Alabama to buy a new car today at a brick and mortar dealership, when I come back to Tishomingo County and register it, I pay my taxes there.
Yeah,
so that's another one.
I've done that too.
And you also, I think you know this, does not restrict service centers. It does not restrict anything. It just says if you're going to have dealerships, brick and mortar dealerships, you got to follow the franchise laws like everybody else.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about the merits and the problems with that. If you can stick around,
yes, I'd love to.
Back. We got Senator Daniel Sparks in the Element Well Studios, and we're chatting with Senator Daniel Sparks. Appreciate you sticking around with us here, Senator. So, all right, we're talking about HB 401. This has created quite the firestorm. You know, I wrote an article about it, and opposition to it. And what you're telling me though is a bit new in that. It is your understanding, your opinion, I think is the way you stated it, so I'm going to frame it as such, that if a vehicle manufacturer wanted to sell their product, their vehicles, new vehicles, into the state of Mississippi, to a consumer in the state of Mississippi, without a physical dealership presence, a third-party owned dealership presence, so-called franchise, that they would be permitted to do that this law does not prohibit that.
Yes. If I thought it prohibited it, I would not have supported it. Okay. And if it, for some reason, went to court and somebody said that's exactly what the bill does, I'll be the first one to drop a piece of legislation that carves out an exception for online sales.
Okay.
Because I believe that's actually a dormant commerce clause issue. If it did that, and if we tried to do that, and I said this from the floor last year, it would violate, in my opinion, the Dormant Commerce Clause. We don't have the ability to regulate what someone else that is otherwise a legal product sells into the state of Mississippi.
Completely agree. Right. Said that a million times. It's not the government's responsibility. It really shouldn't be their purview.
Listen, they're not legally allowed.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay. So we're in agreement on that. I'm learning something here. To that extent. I'm just wondering, though, I don't know, is somebody going to get mad about that? Because this is going to start becoming more common. And are we going to see some parties perhaps not so happy about this new direct route to market, manufacturer, direct to consumer in the sale of new motor vehicles? And they raise a stink, file a lawsuit, et cetera, and then the courts sort it out.
That can always happen. I do find it interesting that last year the people that represented electric vehicles, they wanted to carve out just for manufacturers of electric vehicles that had only ever manufactured electric vehicles, because they weren't looking for one rule for everybody. Okay. And here's the other thing. If we did that, we would be revisiting this in a couple of years for hydrogen cell. That's where we're headed. So that's why when I say it's one set of rules for everybody, if it comes along with a hydrogen sale, we don't have to change the law. You want to sell them direct to your consumer and you want to sell online, that's great.
Okay.
If you want a brick and mortar, that's great. You just need to go through that franchise relationship.
Okay. And you maintain that's because we have these legacy franchise laws in place that require that model to sell a new motor vehicle. So first, I think we refer to these as franchise laws. But it appears to me they really only apply to the sale of new motor vehicles. We probably should rename them as regulation of sale of new motor vehicle laws.
I think that'd be fair. I use this example, I think, on the floor. We don't allow grocery stores to sell wine in grocery stores.
Yeah.
We don't have a Trader Joe's in the state of Mississippi. I have a sneaky feeling that's because they sell wine in the grocery stores and they've chosen not to come here.
Yeah.
So the question is not what should the law be. Like if this was 1970 and I was in the legislature, would I have drafted this law? I don't know. But that is what the law is, and we just want a fair playing field. One other thing that I think is happening, because this is emerging, I got asked a question on the floor about a disruptor from my friend Senator Wiggins, and he used the example of Uber. And, of course, I wasn't in the legislature in 2016, but I got in my time machine on the computer and went back to 2016, and I happened to find the legislation, which he said we didn't regulate Uber when they came in, but we actually did. It was Senate Bill 2815 and ultimately House Bill 1381 that passed. Both of those came through the Senate. The vote was 51-1, and Senator Wiggins was not the one. Senator McDaniel was not the one. It was 51-1 that they regulated. And at the time, Chairman Simmons was chair of highways, and he handled the bill. And I think he was asked a question, isn't this treating this new company, this new technology differently? And pretty much it was like, yes, but we worked our way through it. The difference with that and what we're doing today, we're not treating them differently. We're treating them the same. They wanted a special carve out for themselves. And,
Well, for one manufacturer.
Yeah, well, for a type of vehicle.
Okay, for a type of vehicle. Okay.
And then here was the other thing. I have found this kind of humorous. I have kind of gotten involved in Twitter lately. I'm learning kind of how to tweet. And two big-time tweets that opposed the legislation that I responded to, one is from former Governor Mavis, and one is from Dickie Scruggs. And, that's not the bastion of conservatism in this state.
Right.
And, their arguments, one of them was said, oh, you've protected big business. And I'm like, I don't understand who big business is in your equation. Is it the manufacturers? Is it the local auto dealer, who seems the smallest guy, or the company owned by the richest man in the world? So we've gotten off in the weeds.
Yeah, all right. So then what did HB 401 do exactly different than present law?
Well,
how did it amend this? Because you said, I think I've heard you say we did this to update the so-called franchise laws, which are really the regulation of new car sales laws.
I felt like the law was clear prior to the AG's opinion, but after the AG's opinion, people were saying, well, the law does not prohibit that, so we clarified.
Well, why do we need to prohibit that, though, Senator?
Well,
why do we need to prohibit manufacturers from setting up a dealership in the state of Mississippi?
Well, they can set up a dealership. They just have to work through the franchise model. So that's the thing. They're not prohibited.
Why can't they set up a corporate-owned dealership? We have McDonald's that are corporate-owned, a few stones away from a franchise McDonald's.
Sure. If that had been the law since 1970, I would have said, well,
let's get rid of the laws. How come we didn't introduce a bill to do that?
I did tell Senator Wiggins. He brought that up on the floor. Said, you're welcome to drop that bill to just strip the franchise laws out.
These are bad laws. They're not franchise laws. They're regulate new car sales laws. I was a franchisee. They didn't apply to me.
Sure. Well, I understand that, but it is a situation where I do take a little bit of offense to not from you, from a company who comes in, knows what the law is, circumvented the law, then has survived on government intrusion, and then they complain about government intrusion. That's kind of a little bit of hypocrisy there.
But I see this as a law that's protecting a legacy model that we all know is changing and changing rapidly. And really, I don't even see it as government's responsibility to dictate the route to market, period. If a manufacturer wants to sell direct, they should be able to. If they want to sell through manufacturer-owned stores, they should be able to. If they want to sell through third-party-owned dealerships, they should be able to. I think what the laws say in Mississippi say, no, you can't have all those choices, consumers. That's what I see.
Well, and I do. I think it goes back to also a company coming in and saying to the state of Mississippi, we want to do it our way no matter what your laws are. There's a difference. We didn't write a law to create this system. We amended the law to make sure everybody had to play by the same set of rules. That's the fundamental fairness.
But we amended what I see that this bill does. This is just my take on it. That what we did is we filed a bill, legislation that essentially tightens up bad law.
Well, and I agree that you see the franchise side of this as not being a good
it's terrible.
A good position. But the fact that is the law, everybody has to play by that set of rules.
Well, where are conservative legislatures to stand up and say, this is antiquated, this doesn't apply, these are 50-year-old statutes, we need to get with the program and be more aware of just how rapid disruption occurs across a spectrum of industries.
And I did ask that question. I said, look, nobody was surprised this bill came back. We dropped the bill last year. We had a lot of debate on it, and nobody dropped anything. So we came back with the bill. I do believe it's something that we can work through. I just, I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that it is to make one set of rules for everybody and not give a right to a manufacturer just because their propulsion system is different. They're still a car.
Well, I don't want to do that either. I don't want it to apply to cars exclusively, and I don't want to see the government saying, hey, manufacturer of whatever product, if you're going to sell in Mississippi, you got to sell through this model. I don't think the government should be dictating the route to market. I can't say that enough. And having lived that in an industry that was continuously disrupting the route to market, I mean, on a daily basis, this industry hasn't had to deal with it, honestly, until the last couple of years.
That's right. And I think you have a unique perspective that very few people have, is that you dealt in technology as a business.
That's right.
We're dealing in automobiles. And, I listened to some folks the other day, and I think Commissioner Cheney, again, the insurance commissioner, was talking about the insurability of these cars. Well, that's a separate issue. But he mentioned how technology in automobiles is driving up the cost because, vehicles are more expensive. So if you hit my car, it's not my fender you have to repair. It's a computer as well.
True.
So there's impacts throughout the industry. But I do think you have a very different experience because you lived in the world of technology, not an automobile that now is dealing with technology.
That's true, but I also sold technology products and services, which, by the way, are also insured.
Yes.
And are life and death situations as well, often. So, I do have a different perspective. Before you go, I'll share this with you. I did offline, but for the benefit of the audience, I had a relationship with AT&T. They were a customer, a vendor, a competitor, and they were also a subcontractor, and I was a subcontractor to them. So that's like 5 routes to market between 2 companies.
And you thrived.
Yeah, we did, without government. That's the point. Thanks for coming on, Senator. Appreciate it. Yes, sir. Appreciate it. Coming right back, final segment.